Why did they always laugh at the tattoo? The eagle glinted faintly beneath the fluorescent light as Sarah Mitchell flipped a page in her supply ledger. The inked wings spread across her wrist, small and almost delicate, carrying within them a string of numbers no one seemed to care about. To the men in line, waiting on her signature for gear they barely respected her for issuing, it was nothing more than a cheap mark, a poor choice, a rebellious flourish on the arm of a woman who was supposed to stay invisible in a world built on conformity. They didn't know. Not Briggs, with his thick neck and louder mouth. Not the others who elbowed each other, trading smirks as if her tattoo was an invitation to mock. None of them understood that the numbers inside those wings marked the day 27 went into the fire and only 9 emerged. She signed the page, passed the clipboard across, moved on. It was easier that way, to let them think she was a paper pusher with a soft spot for bad ink, to let them believe the jokes about Eagle Scout and Admin Angel actually stung, to let them think she was small, forgettable. But sometimes she wondered how long it would last, how long before the quiet weight she carried would draw eyes she could no longer avoid. The smell of gun oil and bleach clung to the corridor as she walked, boots silent against the polished concrete. The Montana sun poured in through narrow windows, but inside Blackwater Base the air hummed with routine. Cadence calls echoing from the yard, the crack of rifles far off at the range, the constant drone of generators keeping this ghost installation alive. Sarah moved through it all like she belonged nowhere and everywhere at once. Clipboard in hand, hair pulled so tight into a regulation bun it left no trace of softness. She ticked boxes and carried forms. She was efficient, precise, invisible, and invisibility was safety. Or it had been. She'd almost made it to the stairwell when Briggs' voice cut through the hallway like the low growl of a machine chewing gravel. "Well, if it is Eagle Scout," he called. The others laughed on cue, their boots thudding heavy against the tile. Briggs loomed as he always did, sweat and aftershave rolling off him in equal measure. "What's the rush, Mitchell? Got some bullets to alphabetize." She didn't stop, didn't flinch, didn't even gift him a glance. That was what rattled him most, the calm, the stillness, like she hadn't heard him at all. "Hey, I'm talking to you." He stepped closer, breath sharp, voice hard. "That tattoo of yours means something, secretly special forces." The laughter was cheap, thoughtless, but in the silence between it, Sarah turned, finally meeting his stare. Her voice was calm. "Some of us have actual deadlines, Briggs." It wasn't the words that silenced him. It was the look, the unblinking steadiness in her eyes, a predator's patience hiding behind the rank of a staff sergeant. No shift of weight, no nervous swallow, no sign of intimidation he was used to, just the stillness of someone who didn't need to prove anything. The air thickened. For a moment Briggs seemed ready to push harder. Then, uncomfortable in ways he couldn't explain, he stepped back. "Whatever," he muttered. "Fly along, little bird." The others laughed again, but softer this time, uneasy. Sarah turned and walked away, each step measured, unhurried. She knew they would keep wondering about that eagle on her wrist, about the silence she wrapped herself in like armor. Wondering was safer than knowing. But deep inside, something else stirred. Because 6 weeks ago, Intel had whispered of Obsidian, and because today, someone was coming. Someone who might recognize the tattoo for what it was. Someone she had once carried bleeding across a mountain ridge while rounds tore the dirt around them. And that meant invisibility was running out of time. The mess hall was half full by noon, the air thick with steam and institutional food that always smelled better than it tasted. Sarah sat alone, tray neat, movements methodical. Eating was just another task to complete, another moment to vanish among the noise of boots and clattering trays. She was halfway through her meal when the air shifted. The doors opened, and Colonel James Harrington walked in. The silver hair was cropped close, his uniform immaculate, rows of ribbons on his chest carrying wars most here had never studied. He moved like a man younger than his 72 years, but his eyes were older than all of them put together. The hall didn't fall silent, not exactly, but voices dulled, forks slowed, soldiers shifted, awareness sharpening as the base commander led the legend inside. Sarah didn't look up, not fully, but her peripheral vision caught his stride, calculated the distance, timed the approach. Her breathing slowed, controlled, in, out, in, out. Then Harrington stopped. His eyes swept the room, landed on her, and stayed. She didn't move, didn't blink, but she felt it, the recognition, the weight. The other officers faltered when he broke formation, turning directly toward her table. The clicks of his shoes struck like metronomes on the tile, each one pulling the air tighter. She placed her tablet down, stood. Instinct carried her into position. "Sir." And then the silence came, heavy, expectant, forks frozen halfway to mouths. Harrington looked down at her wrist where the sleeve had slipped, just enough for the eagle to catch the light. For 3 heartbeats his expression shifted, recognition, disbelief, a deeper emotion he hid behind steel. And then he saluted. A colonel to a staff sergeant. The mess hall froze. Even Briggs, fork suspended midair, gaped like he'd swallowed his own voice. Sarah returned the salute, parade ground sharp, held it, and in the whisper-thin silence Harrington's words cut low, meant for her alone. "Permission to speak freely, ma'am." Her jaw tightened, just enough to show she'd heard, just enough to remind him what was at stake. "Not here, sir." The salute lowered. The silence broke, but not in noise, in whispers, spreading fast, unstoppable, questions flaring behind every stare. Who was she? What did the eagle mean? Why had a Delta legend saluted her? Sarah picked up her tray, calm as always, and walked out. The eyes followed, the whispers followed, but she ignored them. Because the countdown had begun. 2 hours until she faced Harrington again. 2 hours until the cover she'd carried for 6 years cracked wide open. 2 hours until the ghosts of August 14 stepped back into the light. And in those 2 hours, Sarah Mitchell, Wraith Division survivor, ghost soldier, codenamed Talon, would have to decide whether to keep hiding in the shadows or finally step into the storm she had always known was coming. What did he see when he looked at her? Sarah asked herself that as she walked toward Colonel Jensen's office. The hallway felt longer than it had ever been, every step echoing against the concrete walls. Her clipboard was gone, her hands empty. For once, she had nothing to hold onto, nothing to disguise her pace. Outside, the Montana sky stretched wide and merciless, but inside, the air thickened with tension. She knocked once, sharp, measured. "Enter," Jensen's voice called, tight and impatient. Sarah stepped inside. The office was austere. No family photos, no plaques, no personal warmth. Just a desk, 2 chairs, a flag in the corner, and maps pinned to the walls like scars. Jensen sat behind the desk, posture ramrod straight, his brow furrowed in a way that seemed permanent. But it was Jensen her eyes locked on. It was the man by the window. Colonel James Harrington. His silver hair caught the late sun, haloed by light, though nothing about him suggested softness. His stance was still, alert, the way soldiers carried themselves even when they weren't supposed to be on guard. He turned as she entered, his eyes landing on her with a weight that pressed against her chest. "Staff Sergeant Mitchell reporting as ordered, sir," she said, voice steady. "At ease," Jensen replied, though his own posture suggested the opposite. He gestured toward Harrington. "Colonel Harrington has requested this meeting. I'll let him explain why." Harrington studied her for a long moment. The silence dragged, filled only by the faint tick of a wall clock. Then he spoke, his voice low, gravel worn down by decades of command. "Your eagle," he said, "August 14, Operation Chimera." The words landed like a thunderclap. No one else in the room could hear. Sarah didn't move, didn't breathe. The office seemed to narrow around her. Yes, sir, she said finally. How many made it out? 9, she answered, her jaw tightening. 9 out of 27. Jensen shifted in his chair, confusion clouding his stern features. Would one of you care to explain what this is about? Harrington didn't look at him. His eyes stayed on Sarah, sharp and searching. Staff Sergeant Mitchell isn't who her file says she is, Thomas. Jensen stiffened. Meaning? Meaning, Harrington said, finally turning toward the commander. You have someone very special on this base. Someone who, officially, does not exist. Sarah reached into her pocket and pulled out a folded paper. The creases were worn soft from years of being carried close, always ready, always hidden. She laid it on Jensen's desk. He unfolded it slowly. His eyes skimmed the redacted lines, the blacked-out names, the classification markers stamped higher than his own clearance. His brow furrowed deeper, his throat working as he read the only words that mattered. Operation Chimera. Operative Sarah Mitchell. Codename Talon. What the hell is this? Jensen muttered. The only proof I'm authorized to carry, sir, Sarah replied, voice calm but edged. Harrington stepped forward, his weathered hand resting on the desk. In 2010, the Department of Defense authorized a unit so classified that fewer than 20 people knew of its existence. Officially, it was called Specialized Infiltration Unit 7. Unofficially, we called it Wraith Division. I've never heard of it, Jensen said. That was the point, Harrington answered. A unit composed entirely of female operators, recruited for their skill trained to match or surpass the highest standards, infiltration, languages, weapons, intelligence, and their greatest strength, his eyes flicked back to Sarah. They were invisible, underestimated. All-female special forces, Jensen scoffed. Impossible. Not impossible, Harrington said sharply. Exceptional, they went where no one else could. They gathered intel no man would ever have access to, and one of them, he nodded at Sarah, was Talon, one of our best. Sarah stood motionless, letting the words settle. She had lived with silence for so long that hearing Harrington say her code name aloud was like a blade carving through the present, dragging pieces of the past into the room. Jensen looked between them, disbelief etched into his face. If such a unit existed, why disband it? Why bury it? Because of Chimera, Harrington said. His voice darkened, carrying weight that filled the room. Because we were betrayed. The word hung like smoke. Sarah spoke then, her voice steady but harder now, shaped by memory. August 14, 2017, Kunar Province. 27 operators moved into a valley at dawn. Intel had confirmed a high-value target, an American defector. The mission, capture or kill. She paused, the office blurred for a heartbeat. The sound of gunfire, screams on the radio, the copper tang of blood. Then the ambush, she continued, her voice dropping lower. Precision fire from multiple positions. They knew we were coming. 12 killed in the first 90 seconds. The rest scattered, pinned. It wasn't a firefight, it was slaughter. Jensen's lips pressed into a line. Harrington's eyes shadowed with memories he didn't need to speak. Official records list Harrington and his team as killed in an IED attack, Sarah said. The truth was different. He was critically wounded. I and 2 other Wraiths held position for 11 hours under constant fire until extraction. Harrington's voice cut in. Talon took a bullet carrying me to cover, never even mentioned it until the bird lifted us out. By then, infection was setting in. Silence thickened. The ticking clock grew louder. If you survived, Jensen asked finally, why erase everything, why hide? Because Chimera wasn't just an ambush, Harrington said grimly. It was facilitated. Someone on our side, someone with access to the highest level of operational planning. A traitor, Jensen muttered. Sarah's jaw clenched. At the highest levels. Harrington nodded. So we buried the survivors, erased Wraith Division, scattered them across the country under deep cover until the threat could be identified. "And now," Jensen demanded, "why here, why my base?" Sarah and Harrington exchanged a look. She answered first. "Because 6 weeks ago, Intel flagged Blackwater as a potential target. Unusual communication anomalies. Security breaches too subtle to be random. Patterns that match what we saw before Chimera." Jensen leaned back, the leather creaking under him. "You're saying this base is under threat? From who?" "Obsidian," Harrington said. The name alone carried weight. "A shadow network of former military and intelligence operators, mercenaries, ideologues. They believe the current world order is corrupt. They've infiltrated before. They'll do it again." "And you think they're here?" "We think they're watching," Sarah said quietly. "And if they are, then the attack is already moving toward us." The office fell silent again. Outside, faintly, a drill sergeant's cadence floated in the air, boots hitting ground, voices shouting in rhythm, the sound of order, discipline, normalcy. But inside, the air felt fractured. Jensen looked at Sarah, truly looked at her. For months she had been invisible, a logistics officer moving forms and boxes, overlooked and dismissed. But now, in the hard light of truth, she stood different. Her posture perfect, her breathing controlled, her eyes watchful in ways no ordinary staff sergeant carried. "You've been on my base for 4 months," Jensen said slowly. "And in that time, have you detected anything concrete?" "Nothing definitive," Sarah admitted. "But anomalies, patterns, blind spots where there shouldn't be any. They're testing us." Jensen drummed his fingers on the desk, his face unreadable. "And your recommendation?" Sarah straightened. "Maintain cover, keep me invisible as long as possible, monitor everything. If they move, we'll be ready." Jensen exhaled, rubbing the bridge of his nose. "I don't like this, not one damn bit. But until I verify otherwise, we'll play it your way. Daily reports, off the record. And Mitchell," his eyes narrowed, "watch your back. If you're right, someone on this base is already working against us." "Yes, sir," she said. She saluted, crisp and exact. And then she left, stepping back into the hallway where whispers already curled like smoke, where eyes already tracked her with questions they couldn't voice. Her cover wasn't gone, not yet, but the first cracks had opened. And through them, the shadows of August 14 were already slipping back into the light. Why did silence feel louder than words? When Sarah walked back through the administrative corridors, the stairs had changed. Before, they passed over her like wind over stone. Now they lingered, measured, curious. She could feel them prick her skin like static. She had lived in shadows for 6 years, slipping between the lines of paperwork and inventory, existing without presence. But Harrington's salute had pulled her into the open. And once people noticed you, they didn't stop. Whispers spread faster than fire on dry grass. By the time she reached Supply Block D, she knew the story had already twisted a dozen ways. Some said she was Harrington's long-lost relative. Others claimed she'd been rescued from a hostage situation years ago. None were true. None were close. And yet each rumor chipped away at the invisibility she had spent years perfecting. Captain Reynolds didn't bother with pleasantries when Sarah stepped into her office. The door shut with a quiet click, the hum of the base muffled. "What the hell was that about, Mitchell?" Reynolds asked, her voice sharp but not unkind. "Jensen called me, said Harrington saluted you, called you ma'am." Sarah's face stayed calm. "A misunderstanding, ma'am. Colonel Harrington may have mistaken me for someone else." Reynolds leaned back, crossing her arms. The lines around her eyes deepened. "I've been in the Army 22 years. I know when someone's feeding me a line. That wasn't a mistake. That was recognition." Sarah held the silence. Sometimes saying nothing said more than words ever could. Reynolds studied her. "Look, I don't need the full story, but I need to know one thing. Are my people in danger?" Sarah met her eyes. "Not if I can help it, ma'am." It wasn't an answer, not really, but it was enough, for now. Reynolds sighed, the fight in her softening. "Fine, handle your business. But if whatever's happening touches my supply chain, I expect to know. Clear?" "Yes, ma'am." As Sarah turned to leave, Reynolds called after her. "Mitchell, be careful. This base isn't as clean as it looks. People play games here. Politics, ambitions, grudges. Watch your six." Sarah didn't reply. She didn't need to. Watching her six was all she'd done for 6 years. The mess of Blackwater was a hive now. Every conversation seemed punctuated by her name. Mitchell. The bird tattoo. Why would a colonel? Her silence gave them permission to imagine, and imagination was far more dangerous than truth. But worse than whispers were the stares of those who didn't bother hiding them. Major Wilson stopped her in the hallway before noon. His scowl was as sharp as the crease in his uniform. "Staff Sergeant." "Sir." "You care to explain why a decorated Delta Force colonel would salute a logistics officer?" "That's between Colonel Harrington and myself, sir. That's not how the chain of command works." He stepped closer, his shadow swallowing hers. "I'm the operations officer on this base. If there's something I should know, I expect to be informed." "You'd have to ask Colonel Jensen, sir," she said evenly. "He's been briefed." "I'm asking you." His voice lowered, the pressure in it more personal than professional. His eyes searched hers, trying to find the crack, but Sarah's stillness unnerved him, the same way it had rattled Briggs. The stillness of someone who had been tested long before this moment. "You're not just a supply clerk, are you?" Wilson asked finally. "My current assignment is logistics, sir." It wasn't a lie, but it wasn't the truth either. Wilson's jaw tightened. "I don't like mysteries on my base, especially not when they involve my chain of command. This conversation isn't over." "No, sir," Sarah replied. She watched him walk away, his posture stiff with frustration. He'd dig deeper. That was who Wilson was: ambitious, meticulous, hungry for control, and that hunger made him dangerous. Later at dawn, she found solitude on the shooting range. Lane 12, the pistol steady in her hand, each shot a metronome of control. In the half-light, muzzle flashes painted her face in staccato bursts. The rhythm grounded her. Breath in, fire, breath out, fire. She was finishing her third magazine when she felt it, the prickle of eyes. Captain Rodriguez leaned against the observation rail, his uniform immaculate despite the hour. His gaze was sharp, curious. "Impressive shooting, Mitchell," he said as she holstered her weapon. "Didn't know logistics officers trained to that standard." "Just keeping current, sir." Those groupings were current. That was expert level. Sarah kept her expression neutral. "I take my qualifications seriously." Rodriguez stepped closer, lowering his voice. "Word is, you're not just logistics. That Harrington recognized you. That's a hell of a rumor." "People talk, sir. Doesn't make it true." "No," Rodriguez said softly. "But a Delta colonel saluting a staff sergeant, that makes people curious." He studied her, his face half in shadow from the early light. "Yesterday, communications had a glitch. Electromagnetic interference. Brief, but it hit our secure channels, and it happened right around the time you were meeting with Jensen and Harrington." Sarah's pulse quickened, but her face stayed still. "I wouldn't know anything about that, sir." Rodriguez's eyes narrowed. "If something happening that compromises base security, I should be informed." "You should take that up with Colonel Jensen." "I intend to," Rodriguez said. He stepped aside, his words carrying the weight of a warning. "Enjoy your inventory, Mitchell." She walked past him, measured, but inside her mind spun. Communications interference. Too precise to be coincidence. Too similar to what she'd seen before Chimera. The pattern was building, and if the pattern was real, then the attack was closer than anyone wanted to admit. By the time she reached her quarters, her secure phone vibrated. She froze. It was a device only 9 people in the world should have been able to reach. Only 9 who had survived Chimera. One new message flashed on the encrypted screen. Eagle flies at midnight. Her blood ran cold. The phrase was Wraith Division code. Emergency, imminent threat, immediate response required. But there was a problem. No one should have been able to send it. Which meant either a Wraith had been compromised, or someone outside the division knew far more than they should. Sarah deleted the message instantly, but its weight stayed with her. The shadows of Chimera were no longer memories. They were moving, alive here. And someone on Blackwater's base was already working for Obsidian. What did it mean when a general arrived unannounced? By the time Sarah heard the news, the atmosphere on base had shifted again. Soldiers moved with sharper edges, voices clipped, glances quick and measuring. Whispers weren't whispers anymore, they were questions, and questions were dangerous. She knew the name before Reynolds even said it. General Richard Montgomery, her captain told her, arms folded, eyes watching carefully. Unscheduled. Officially, he's here to observe our new CQC program. Unofficially, I don't know, but it's not casual. Montgomery, commander of Joint Special Operations Command. A man who didn't show up anywhere without reason. A man who had erased Wraith Division from the books 6 years ago. Sarah kept her voice calm. When? This afternoon, Reynolds said. Watch yourself, Mitchell. Whatever game you're playing, the stakes just went up. Sarah gave a crisp nod, but inside, her pulse was a drumbeat. If Montgomery was coming, it wasn't for training drills. He was coming because of her. And that meant the veil of invisibility she'd lived under was gone for good. At 1300 hours, she knocked on Colonel Jensen's office door. Enter. She stepped inside to find Harrington by the window again, posture as steady as the first time. Jensen sat behind his desk, tension tight in the lines of his face, and seated across from him, sharp eyes missing nothing, was General Montgomery. He rose slightly as Sarah entered. Age hadn't softened him. His posture was still ramrod straight, his limp subtle, his hands scarred but steady. He carried the weight of too many wars in his gaze, and yet those eyes were clear, cutting, impossible to look away from. Staff Sergeant Mitchell, Jensen began, his tone forced. General Montgomery has requested this meeting. It's all right, Thomas, Montgomery interrupted. His voice was gravel, tempered by decades of command. Let's dispense with formalities. His eyes locked on Sarah. Captain Mitchell, or should I say Talon? The title hit like a stone breaking the surface of still water. Jensen stiffened. Harrington allowed the faintest smile. Sarah came to attention. Sir. Sit, Montgomery said, gesturing to the chair beside him. We have matters to discuss. The weight of silence filled the room as she obeyed, her movements precise. For the first time in years, her real rank had been spoken aloud. For the first time, she wasn't just Mitchell, the logistics officer. Montgomery leaned forward. I've been briefed on yesterday's incident. Not ideal, but workable. He shot Harrington a look. James always did have a flair for drama. In my defense, Harrington replied dryly, I wasn't expecting to see a Wraith operative sitting in a mess hall. Understandable, Montgomery said. His gaze shifted back to Sarah. But it's complicated our timeline. Report, Captain. What have you observed? Sarah hesitated, eyes flicking toward Jensen. Montgomery caught it. Speak freely. The colonel has been cleared for this discussion. So she did. The communication anomalies, the cycling blind spots on security cameras, the subtle failures of perimeter sensors, all of them small enough to dismiss as random, all of them forming a pattern she knew too well. Montgomery listened without interruption, his face unreadable. Harrington stood silent, watching Jensen wrestle with disbelief. In personnel, Montgomery asked at last. Nothing concrete, sir, Sarah answered carefully. But Major Wilson has taken unusual interest in my background since Harrington's recognition. Captain Rodriguez has noted anomalies, including interference timed to our meeting. Both warrant closer observation. Jensen bristled. Wilson and Rodriguez are two of my best officers. No one is above suspicion, Harrington said. If Obsidian is inside this base, they'll use anyone, knowingly or not. Obsidian, Jensen repeated. You mentioned them yesterday. What exactly are we dealing with? Montgomery's jaw tightened. He exchanged a look with Harrington before answering. A shadow organization, he said. Former military, former intelligence, some American, some foreign, all trained. They appeared during Afghanistan mercenaries for the highest bidder at first, but it's more than that now. They have ideology. They believe the current world order is corrupt. They want to reset it. And you think they've infiltrated my base? We think they're preparing, Montgomery said. His voice carried no doubt. Blackwater trains over 60% of our Tier 1 operators. If Obsidian wants to cripple our capabilities, this is where they strike. Jensen paled. You're talking about an attack on U.S. soil, against an active military installation. That's exactly what we're talking about, Montgomery said. And based on Captain Mitchell's observations, it may be imminent. The silence that followed was heavy, broken only by the faint hum of the air conditioning. Jensen leaned back, the leather creaking beneath him. His eyes moved to Sarah again, seeing her not as a clerk but as something else entirely. Something he wasn't sure he wanted on his base. Then what now? He asked. Am I supposed to pretend she's still a staff sergeant, that I don't know who she is? That would be ideal, Harrington said quietly. Montgomery nodded. Mitchell will continue logistics, but with expanded authority. She's being attached to your command staff, Colonel. She'll have access to all systems, all records, all personnel files. And if she identifies a threat, Jensen pressed. Then we act, Montgomery said. Decisively. Within legal parameters, of course, but make no mistake, if Obsidian moves, the response may need to be lethal. Sarah sat perfectly still, breathing slow, hands resting lightly on her knees. On the surface she looked calm, but inside her mind spun, mapping scenarios, calculating contingencies, balancing the fragile line between cover and exposure. Montgomery broke the silence. There's something else you should know, that tattoo. He gestured toward her wrist. It's not just an identifier, it's a memorial. August 14th wasn't just the day of Chimera. It was the day Wraith Division was erased from existence. The eagle is what's left, a reminder. Harrington's voice softened. When everything collapsed in that valley, when we were surrounded, Talon took command. She organized a perimeter called in extraction, carried men out with a bullet in her shoulder. Without her, none of us would be alive. Sarah kept her gaze fixed on a point on the wall. She didn't want the words, didn't need them. She hadn't done it for recognition. She had done it because there was no other choice. Jensen's voice dropped. I understand now, and I apologize for doubting you, Captain. Thank you, sir, she said evenly. Montgomery stood, signaling the meeting's end. Colonel, I'll need a secure space for further discussions with Captain Mitchell. My conference room, Jensen offered. It's swept daily. Good, Montgomery said. He turned to Sarah. With me. When the door closed behind them, his formal tone softened. How are you really doing, Sarah? I'm operational, sir. That's not what I asked. Her jaw tightened. The silence stretched. 6 years of isolation pressed in on her. 6 years of wearing identities like masks, of living lives that weren't hers. She had forgotten what it felt like to answer questions honestly. I'm managing, she said at last. Managing, Montgomery repeated. Not living, not thriving, just managing. She didn't reply. He sighed. After Chimera, we scattered you for security, but I've always wondered about the cost. Wraith Division wasn't just erased from records, it was erased from itself. Each of you alone, always watching, always waiting. Sarah's eyes flicked to the floor. Sometimes in the small hours of the night, she still heard the gunfire, still smelled the cordite, still felt the weight of the fallen across her shoulders. Managing was all she had. Montgomery's tone hardened again. Listen carefully. Obsidian isn't just here, they're moving everywhere. 3 of your former Wraith sisters have reported similar anomalies. One of them, his voice faltered. Arrow, Melissa Winters, she's dead. Sarah's chest tightened. She saw Melissa's smile, the way she joked about opening a surf shop in Florida. The memory cut sharp and quick. Apparent suicide, Montgomery continued. We don't believe it. She was compromised, killed, which means Obsidian is accelerating their timeline. Sarah's breath stilled, Arrow gone, Cypher compromised, and Blackwater in their crosshairs. How long, she asked. 72 hours at most. The words pressed like ice into her skin. Your job, Montgomery said, is to find the entry point, find the collaborators, identify the strike before it lands. Once you do, we move. Until then, you keep your cover as intact as you can. Sarah nodded. Understood, sir. And Sarah, his voice softened again. Watch your back. If Obsidian knows who you are, you're already in their sights. Her answer was quiet. I've always been in their sights, sir. Montgomery studied her for a long moment. Then he gave a short nod. Dismissed and good hunting. She saluted, precise and controlled, then stepped back into the hallway. The base was humming louder now. Soldiers moved like the air itself had grown charged. Somewhere in that noise, someone was waiting. Someone who had already bent the cameras, interfered with the communications, and sent her a message they should never have known. The countdown had started. 72 hours. And the eagle on her wrist burned hotter than it had in years. What did safety mean when even walls carried secrets? Sarah asked herself that as she crossed the compound under the cover of night. The Montana sky spread above her, stars sharp as blades. The base had gone quiet after lights out, the hum of generators the only constant sound. But Sarah knew silence could be deceptive. Silence had betrayed her before. She carried no visible weapon, just a flashlight clipped to her vest and a folder tucked under one arm. To anyone watching, she was simply on another late-night supply run. Paperwork, inventory, logistics. The disguise she had worn so long it sometimes felt like truth. But tonight wasn't logistics. Tonight was survival. The safe house was hidden where no one thought to look. Storage hangar 12B on the far edge of the base. Once used for maintenance equipment, it now held only dust and forgotten crates. To most, it was empty. To Wraith Division, it was sanctuary. The lock looked ordinary, but when Sarah pressed her thumb against the rusted latch, a faint green light pulsed from a sensor nearly invisible beneath the metal. She entered a code by memory, 8 numbers she hadn't spoken aloud in years. The lock clicked open. Inside, the air smelled of stale wood and machine oil, but beneath it lingered something else, faint traces of leather, paper, cleaning solvents, signs that someone had been here recently. She moved with careful steps, scanning the room. To the left, a row of supply crates. To the right, a workbench covered in dust except for one patch freshly cleared. Her hand brushed over the surface, clean, wiped down. She knelt, pulled open the lowest drawer, a false bottom. Beneath it, a small case wrapped in black cloth. The Wraith insignia was etched faintly into the metal, an eagle's talon wrapped around a blade. Sarah's throat tightened. She opened it slowly. Inside, a suppressed sidearm, standard Wraith issue. A burner phone encrypted. A slim folder marked only with a date, 9/17. She flipped it open. Inside, grainy photos. Overhead surveillance of Blackwater's motor pool. Notes scribbled in shorthand only a Wraith would recognize. The words chilled her. Movement confirmed. Obsidian present. Target unknown. The last page held a single line, written in handwriting Sarah recognized instantly. Arrow. Her chest clenched. This had been Melissa's cache, her final act before she died. She had left it for whoever might come after, maybe even for Sarah herself. The burner phone buzzed suddenly, startling her. A message flashed on the dark screen. "We see you." Her pulse spiked. She killed the device instantly, smashing it against the concrete until the casing split, circuits scattering like broken glass. The echo rang too loud in the empty hangar. Her cover wasn't slipping, it was gone. When she stepped out into the night air again, her hand instinctively brushed her wrist, the eagle ink burning against her skin. Whoever had sent that message wasn't guessing. They knew. They were close. She couldn't fight this alone, not anymore. The next morning, she found Captain Reynolds in the motor pool, clipboard in hand, her uniform streaked with grease. She was overseeing an inspection, barking orders at two mechanics who scrambled to keep up. "Ma'am," Sarah said evenly, stepping into her line of sight. Reynolds turned, surprise flashing briefly before suspicion settled in. "Mitchell, what is it?" Sarah hesitated. This was the moment, the line she couldn't uncross. "I need to speak with you, privately." Reynolds studied her, the noise of engines and shouting soldiers filling the air between them. Then she nodded once, handing the clipboard to a sergeant. "Take 5, boys. Don't touch a damn thing until I'm back." They walked into the shadow of a parked Humvee, the smell of oil heavy around them. Reynolds crossed her arms. "Talk." Sarah kept her voice low. "You were right yesterday, this base isn't clean. There are anomalies, patterns, and it's not random." Reynolds' brow furrowed. "Meaning?" "Obsidian," Sarah said. The word hung between them like smoke. Reynolds' lips tightened. She didn't laugh, didn't scoff. She just stared, processing. "You're not joking," she said finally. "No, ma'am." "And you," Reynolds' voice dropped, "you're not just logistics." Sarah met her eyes. "No, ma'am." Reynolds exhaled slowly, leaning back against the Humvee. "Damn, I knew something was off. Wilson breathing down your neck. Rodriguez circling like a hawk. Harrington saluting you like you outranked God himself. Now this." "I can't do this alone," Sarah said quietly. "I need someone I can trust, someone inside the command chain, someone who'll back me when things break open." Reynolds studied her for a long moment, the sounds of the motor pool fading into background noise. Her jaw tightened. "If I say yes, I'm stepping into something I can't walk back from." "Yes, ma'am." "And if I say no?" Sarah's gaze didn't waver. "Then I'll keep doing my job, alone." Reynolds let out a slow breath, shaking her head. "Damn it, Mitchell." Then she straightened, her voice firm. "All right, you've got me, but I need proof, not rumors, not whispers, hard proof." "I have it," Sarah said. She told her about the safe house, the case, the photos, the note signed by Arrow. She didn't mention the message. Not yet. Reynolds' eyes darkened. "Melissa Winters, I remember her name from somewhere. Intel brief, maybe, listed as suicide." "It wasn't," Sarah said. "Obsidian silenced her. She left evidence behind." Reynolds nodded slowly. "Then we'll use it quietly, carefully, until we know exactly who's compromised." Sarah felt something she hadn't in months. Not relief, it was too fragile for that, but something like steadiness. For the first time since Harrington's salute, she wasn't carrying the weight entirely alone. But weight shared was still weight, and shadows didn't lift just because someone else stepped into them. That night as she lay in her bunk, the whispers from the barracks carried faint through the walls. Jokes, laughter, stories told half in sleep, normal sounds of soldiers who still believed their world was intact. But Sarah knew better. Arrow was dead, the cache had been left behind, the burner phone had been compromised. And somewhere on this base, Obsidian was already watching. When did suspicion become the same as proof? Sarah asked herself that as she watched the motor pool through the narrow glass of the command center. Soldiers moved below, hauling crates, checking Humvees, running through the routines of a normal day. But the rhythm was wrong, too sharp, too rehearsed. as if someone somewhere had written a script for them to follow. Reynolds stood beside her, arms folded, face calm but eyes alert. "They're shifting patrol patterns again," she murmured. "Wilson signed off on it, says it's for efficiency." Sarah's jaw tightened. Efficiency was never random. Efficiency meant preparation, clearing blind spots, creating predictable lanes, exactly the kind of groundwork Obsidian laid before a strike. "Rodriguez questioned me this morning," Sarah said quietly. Reynolds' brow arched. "About what?" "My marksmanship, my background." He's circling, testing. "He knows I'm not what my file says." "And Wilson?" Sarah shook her head. "Wilson isn't testing, he's probing. He wants control, and if he doesn't get it," she let the thought trail. Reynolds exhaled slowly. "We're running out of time." Sarah didn't answer, because she already knew time wasn't running out, time was gone. That night she found the proof. The safe house cache had included a map of Blackwater's underground service tunnels, forgotten lines from the 1970s, when the base had been wired for Cold War contingencies. Most had collapsed, but some still connected directly to the motor pool, the comms hub, and the eastern fence line. She slipped into the tunnels just after midnight, flashlight beams slicing through damp air. Dust clung to her boots, cobwebs brushing her arms. Each step echoed faintly, swallowed by the narrow stone. The first anomaly came 20 meters in. Footprints. Fresh. Too fresh for a place that hadn't been officially entered in decades. Her flashlight tracked the prints until they veered into a side passage. At the end, a metal grate led upward directly beneath the comms hub. And there in the dirt she found it. A small black device no larger than a pack of cards. Antennas folded tight, light dead. But Sarah knew the design. She'd seen it in Syria. A signal repeater, capable of rerouting transmissions, hijacking secure lines, feeding false data into trusted systems. Her stomach sank. The interference, the blind spots, it wasn't testing, it was infiltration. She bagged the device, concealed her trail, and slipped back above ground before dawn. Reynolds was waiting in the motor pool office, sipping bitter coffee, her fatigue jacket thrown over a chair. She raised an eyebrow when Sarah placed the device on the desk. "Where?" "Service tunnel, beneath comms." Reynolds leaned forward, studying it. "Jesus, that's military grade." "Obsidian," Sarah said flatly. Reynolds looked at her, eyes sharp. "Then it's not imminent, it's already happening." The words hung heavy between them. Sarah nodded once. "The attack is in motion. The question is when they'll trigger it." Before Reynolds could answer, the office door opened. Major Wilson stepped in, clipboard in hand, his expression neutral, too neutral. His eyes landed on Sarah first, then the device on the desk. He froze for a fraction of a second, then recovered. "Staff Sergeant, Captain." He closed the door behind him. "I was told I'd find you here." Sarah slid the device into her pack in one smooth motion, but Wilson had already seen it. "What was that?" he asked, voice casual but edged. "Routine inspection," Sarah said evenly. Wilson's gaze lingered. Then he smiled, a thin, sharp smile that didn't touch his eyes. "Routine, right. You've been doing a lot of routine lately, haven't you, Mitchell?" Sarah stayed silent. Wilson's eyes shifted to Reynolds. "Captain, a word in private." Reynolds didn't move. "Anything you need to say, you can say here." Wilson's smile thinned further. "That's so." "Yes, Major," Reynolds said firmly. "That's so." The silence crackled. Wilson adjusted the clipboard under his arm. "Very well, but I'll remind you both, unusual activities are being noted. Chain of command is watching closely. I'd hate to see careers cut short over misunderstandings." With that he left, closing the door softly behind him. Reynolds muttered under her breath, "That man's dirty." Sarah didn't disagree, but she also didn't confirm. Not yet, because suspicion wasn't proof. and proof was the only weapon sharper than a bullet. By afternoon, the base was buzzing with tension. A false alarm drill rattled the barracks. Weapons checks were doubled. Rodriguez pulled her aside outside the comms hub, his expression unreadable. "Mitchell," he said quietly, "walk with me." She matched his stride as they moved down the corridor. "I know you're not who your file says you are," Rodriguez said flatly. Sarah's heart slowed, steadied. "That's so, sir." "Yes," Rodriguez replied. "And I know Harrington and Montgomery didn't come here for training. They came for you." Sarah didn't answer. Rodriguez glanced at her, his voice dropping lower. "I don't know what's going on, but I know this. Someone is setting us up. Patrol routes shifting, comms interference, supply anomalies. It doesn't add up. You've seen it too." Her silence was confirmation enough. Rodriguez stopped, turning to face her. "Tell me one thing, Mitchell. Are we about to be hit?" Her eyes met his, steady and calm. "Yes." Rodriguez inhaled sharply, then nodded once. "Then let me help." Sarah studied him, reading the lines of his face. Trust was a currency she couldn't afford to spend recklessly, but she needed allies, and Rodriguez had already shown he was watching, listening. "Careful what you wish for, sir," she said quietly. "You may not like the answer when it comes." That night, alarms blared across Blackwater. Soldiers scrambled from bunks, boots pounded against concrete, shouts filled the air. At first, it looked like another drill, but drills didn't cut power to the comms hub. Drills didn't fry backup generators. Drills didn't black out the eastern fence while a convoy of unmarked trucks rolled past the first checkpoint. Sarah was already moving before the siren reached full pitch. Her boots hammered against the pavement, her pack heavy with Arrow's case and the recovered device. Reynolds fell in beside her, rifle in hand. "This isn't practice," Reynolds shouted over the chaos. "No," Sarah said, eyes sharp, breath steady. "This is obsidian." And as smoke began to rise from the far side of the base, Sarah Mitchell, Talon of Wraith Division, knew the waiting was over. The war she'd carried in silence for 6 years had come to Blackwater's gates. And this time, there would be no invisibility. How fast can order collapse into chaos? The answer came in seconds. One moment, Blackwater Base was drills and cadence, familiar routines carried out beneath a blue Montana sky. The next, alarms screamed through the night, red lights flashing across barracks and hallways. Soldiers sprinted half-dressed, rifles in hand, boots pounding against concrete. Smoke curled above the eastern fence line. Somewhere in the distance, the sharp rattle of gunfire split the night. Sarah Mitchell didn't hesitate. She had lived this moment before, the sudden shift from calm to violence, the fracture between preparation and survival. But this time, she wasn't hidden in foreign mountains or desert villages. This time, the war had come home. Reynolds fell into stride beside her, rifle slung tight, jaw clenched. Wilson ordered half the quick response team east, too fast, like he knew exactly where to send them. Sarah's stomach tightened. Too convenient, too clean. "Rodriguez?" she asked. "West fence. He's moving to reinforce," Reynolds answered. Sarah nodded once. If Rodriguez was acting on instinct, he was still trustworthy. If Wilson was moving troops like pieces on a prearranged board, then he wasn't just compromised. He was orchestrating. They reached the comms hub, only to find the door ajar, lights flickering. Inside, monitors glowed red with static. The repeater Sarah had recovered was only the first. Others were already in place, feeding chaos into the system. A young sergeant turned, panic on his face. "We've lost external comms, ma'am, local grid only. Jamming's too strong." "Shut down everything non-essential," Sarah cut in, voice calm, clipped. "Route all power to internal channels. Lock frequencies. Burn encryption if you have to." The sergeant froze, startled by the authority in her tone. Then he moved, obeying without question. Reynolds caught the glance he shot Sarah, a look that said, she's no staff sergeant. The mask was crumbling, whether she liked it or not. The base shuddered as an explosion rippled from the east. Dust rained from the ceiling. Distant shouts rose, then fell into static on the radios. Reynolds' eyes snapped to Sarah. "They're breaching." Sarah exhaled once, slow and steady, grounding herself in the chaos. The tattoo on her wrist burned beneath the sleeve, a reminder of what silence had cost her before. "Then we hold," she said softly. They pushed into the yard, chaos flooding around them. Soldiers scrambled for position, smoke stung the air, and the sky pulsed with the strobe of emergency lights. And there in the half-light Sarah saw him. Major Wilson, standing calm in the storm, radio pressed to his ear, eyes sharp. He wasn't panicked. He wasn't reacting. He was directing. She caught Reynolds' glance, the unspoken question, "Now?" Sarah shook her head. Not yet. Proof mattered, even in war. Instead, she moved toward the motor pool, instincts pulling her. If Obsidian wanted to cripple Blackwater, they'd target mobility, cut off vehicles, trap soldiers inside their own base. She was right. 2 trucks were already burning, flames clawing at the night sky. Shadows moved at the edge of the lot, figures in black, rifles slung, moving with the precision of men who had trained where she had trained. Obsidian operators, former soldiers turned ghosts. Sarah dropped into cover behind a Humvee, her breath steady, her mind calculating. 3 in her line of sight, more behind. Each movement surgical, rehearsed. She raised her pistol. Breath in, squeeze, breath out, another. 2 fell before the third registered the threat. He turned, rifle rising, and then dropped as Reynolds' shot cracked the air. Silence followed, thick, heavy. "Clear," Reynolds whispered. "For now." Sarah moved forward, scanning the shadows. Her heart didn't race. It never did in moments like this. Instead, everything slowed, sharpened. The way boots pressed into gravel, the faint flicker of firelight on metal, the silence that carried too much weight. She reached the far wall of the motor pool and stopped cold. A hatch half hidden, open. The tunnels. She crouched, inspecting. Fresh scuffs marked the dirt, heavy boots, multiple moving in and out. "They're inside," she murmured. Reynolds' face hardened. "Then this isn't a raid, it's infiltration." Before Sarah could answer, the radio on Reynolds' vest crackled. Rodriguez's voice cut through, sharp with strain. "West fence compromised, repeat compromised. Unknown number inside perimeter. We're holding but..." Static swallowed the rest. Reynolds adjusted the dial, cursing under her breath. Signals jammed. Sarah stood, her eyes narrowing. They weren't fighting from outside. They were already embedded, blending, waiting. The firefight was just the distraction. "This was planned," she said quietly. "Every patrol shift, every blind spot. Wilson didn't miss it, he built it." Reynolds' jaw clenched. "So what do we do?" Sarah's answer came like a breath, steady and certain. "We take it back." They moved, cutting across the compound, slipping through smoke and chaos. Soldiers shouted orders, some clear, some conflicting. Confusion was as deadly as bullets. And in that confusion, Sarah saw fear, young privates gripping rifles too tight, corporals glancing at each other for guidance. She stopped. Her silence alone drew their eyes. "We hold the line," she said simply. "No speech, no theatrics, just 5 words, steady and sharp." And in that moment the fear shifted. Not gone, but steadied, anchored. Sometimes leadership wasn't volume, it was gravity. Reynolds glanced at her, a flicker of respect passing across her face. Gunfire rattled again, closer now. Sarah raised her pistol, moving toward the sound. Reynolds followed. The tattoo burned hotter beneath her sleeve. They reached the west yard just as Rodriguez's unit pulled back under fire. 3 soldiers staggered, one bleeding from the shoulder. Rodriguez himself was crouched behind cover, rifle tight, teeth bared. When his eyes landed on Sarah, something flickered there. Recognition. not of rank but of presence. "You were right," he called. "They're inside, we've seen uniforms, our own." The words cut deeper than the bullets. Obsidian hadn't just infiltrated the perimeter. They had men wearing Blackwater's face. Betrayal was no longer a suspicion. It was breathing among them. Sarah's hand tightened on her pistol. The shadows of Chimera had returned. And this time, she wouldn't let silence bury the truth. How do you know when the moment has finally arrived? Sarah felt it before she saw it, the shift in the air, the rhythm of boots, the silence that falls when betrayal is about to step out of the shadows. The west yard was chaos. Muzzle flashes lit the smoke, tracer rounds carving fire through the night. Blackwater soldiers shouted, some giving orders, some obeying, some not. Confusion was the enemy now, tearing holes wider than any rifle. And in that confusion, Sarah spotted him. Wilson, standing too still in the storm, headset clipped to his collar, lips moving with words she knew weren't for them. Reynolds saw it too. He's calling them in. Sarah moved. She didn't run. She didn't shout. She just walked with purpose, steps steady, eyes locked on the man who had orchestrated every blind spot, every rerouted patrol, every carefully timed failure. Wilson turned as she approached. His smile was calm, too calm for the battlefield. "Staff Sergeant," he said, voice almost casual, "shouldn't you be in supply?" The lie tasted bitter in the smoke-filled air. "Who are you talking to, Major?" Sarah asked, her voice even, cutting through the noise around them. His eyes flicked just a fraction toward the motor pool, where shadows moved that didn't belong to Blackwater. That was answer enough. "Careful," he said softly. "Accusations like that can end careers." Sarah's pistol was steady at her side, but her voice carried more weight than steel. "You sold them out, just like Chimera." The name hit him like a strike. His jaw twitched, eyes narrowing. Reynolds raised her rifle, anger flashing across her face. "You killed Arrow." Wilson didn't deny it. He only smiled, thin, cold. "You still don't understand. The world you're protecting is rotting. Obsidian isn't treason, it's evolution. You of all people should see that." Sarah stepped closer, her gaze unblinking. "All I see is a coward who traded loyalty for ideology." Gunfire cracked behind them, drawing closer. Rodriguez's men were pushing back, fighting to hold the west yard. Time was running out. Wilson's hand twitched near his sidearm, but Sarah moved faster. Her pistol rose, aimed square at his chest. The yard froze. Soldiers turned. Eyes locked on the woman they thought was a supply clerk, standing with weapon leveled at their operations officer. Wilson laughed low, incredulous. "Are you really going to do it, Mitchell, in front of everyone? Then what? You think they'll follow you?" Sarah didn't answer. She didn't need to. Because in that silence, the truth was already speaking louder than his words. Reynolds' voice cut the air, sharp as a blade. "Orders are compromised. Mitchell has command." The soldiers wavered, confused, afraid. But then Rodriguez stepped forward, blood streaking his arm, rifle tight in his grip. "She's right. Mitchell saw this coming. She's been fighting it since before we knew it was here." Their eyes shifted, from Wilson to Sarah, from chaos to clarity. Wilson saw it too, the tide turning, the authority slipping, and desperation twisted his face. He drew. Sarah fired first. The shot cracked through the night, echoing against the concrete walls. Wilson staggered, eyes wide, shock written in the lines of his face. He crumpled, the radio slipping from his grasp. Silence. Then the yard erupted again, but this time not in confusion. Orders snapped sharp. Soldiers rallied. The line steadied. Obsidian's infiltrators faltered under the renewed surge. Sarah lowered her weapon, breath steady, heart still calm. Not victory, not relief, just necessity. Rodriguez moved to her side, eyes hard. "We'll need proof," he said quietly. "You'll have it," Sarah replied. She crouched, pulling the radio from Wilson's fallen body. The last transmission was still active, coordinates feeding into the ether, proof enough. Reynolds glanced down at the man who had worn their uniform, her voice bitter. Damn shame. Sarah's eyes stayed forward. No, it's a choice, he made his. The fight dragged on for hours, but the tide had turned. By dawn, smoke curled over the eastern fence where Obsidian's truck smoldered. Bodies, friend and foe alike, lay covered, silent testimony to the night's cost. Sarah stood at the edge of the yard, watching the sun bleed across the horizon. Her uniform was streaked with dust, her wrist burning beneath the tattoo. The eagle had always been a memorial. Now it was a witness too. Montgomery arrived by mid-morning, his convoy rolling heavy through the battered gates. He found her where she had been since the shooting stopped, still, quiet, watching. "You held," he said simply. "We survived," Sarah answered. Montgomery studied her, his weathered face unreadable. "Wilson's betrayal will stain records for years, but what you did," he shook his head slightly. "You gave them more than orders. You gave them something to hold on to." Sarah didn't reply, because she hadn't done it for records. She had done it because no one else could, because silence had cost enough already. Reynolds joined them, exhaustion etched into every line of her face. She glanced at Sarah, then at Montgomery. "If she hadn't been here, sir, this base would have fallen." Montgomery nodded once, then looked at Sarah. "What do you want now?" The question lingered. For 6 years she had wanted nothing but invisibility, to vanish into routine, to bury Talon under layers of logistics and silence. But now, the base had seen her, Reynolds had seen her, Rodriguez had seen her. The choice wasn't hers alone anymore. "I'll finish the mission," she said quietly, "and then I'll decide." Montgomery accepted that. He always had known when to push and when not to. "Fair enough. For now, Captain Mitchell, stand down. You've earned it." She saluted, sharp and exact. The general walked away. Reynolds followed, but Sarah stayed, watching the smoke drift against the morning sky, listening to the quiet after the storm. Sometimes silence was survival. Sometimes silence was betrayal. And sometimes silence was dignity itself. She lowered her hand, the tattoo catching the sun. The eagle seemed almost alive, wings spread wide, carrying the weight of the numbers inked within. 27, 9. Not forgotten, never forgotten. She turned, walking back toward the base that had mocked her, doubted her, then followed her. Not with words, not with speeches, just with silence that acted when it had to. Because sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts.